This month we return to GSI Studios where Josh Giunta takes us through the recording and mixing process he uses for live piano.
All right, so we're here in the control room, Studio A, GSI Studios, and this is where I kind of make the sound a reality, obviously. I have all the mics set up, and I'm gonna go through each mic individually and EQ if necessary, or move mics if necessary, and kind of put everything together, deal with phase, and then kind of choose my blend of which microphones are gonna create the piano sound. So Taylor's in there playing, Taylor Rixty, and I'm gonna start with the 87s, the close pair, and I'll start with just the left side mic, but I'll listen to it in mono, and then get that tone, get that level, and then I'll do the same with the right, get that tone, get that level, proper EQing, and then I'll pan them as a pair and kind of deal with them as a pair. So here I'll dive into the first mic, the left side U87. Piano is a super dynamic instrument, so I have to really pay attention to my levels. That, you know, I have to be aware of his loudest attacks on the piano. That level can't be close to peaking. So his loudest playing has to come in at around, you know, I'd say 70% up of the fader. You know, if 100% being like 0 dB. So I want his peaks to have plenty of headroom. So that's kind of what I'm looking for when I'm setting my gain levels. So my gain looks good. I'm gonna EQ a little bit. I'm hearing that it sounds there's a little too much high mid information, and I could also fatten up the low end just a little bit. So I'm gonna go in with the API 560 EQ, and here at the studio we have an API 1608 32 channel console, which is amazing. So shout out to API for this console. Love it. And the little trick you'll see me doing throughout this whole EQing process is that I just like to see what's there in the frequencies, because these EQs have such a beautiful sound when you boost. So I usually do like extreme boosting just to see what those frequencies are sounding like, and then do my EQ. So I get to really hear, if I take up the 16K, I get to see if I take it, you know, 8 dB up, I get to really hear how that mic is capturing 16K on that instrument, and then, you know, I can adjust accordingly if I'm boosting or cutting. And I tend to boost a lot. As an engineer, I EQ a lot. My philosophy is that if you're working with really great analog gear, you might as well put the information in there. Put the, you know, that sonic frequency, you might as well hype it up. You can always scale it back later. I do cuts on frequencies that are annoying to my ear. So right now I was hearing that the upper mid range was a little teeny, so I cut it, and I'm EQing instead of moving the microphone, because I know I have other microphones set up now that are covering my basses to balance out that tinniness. Whereas if I only had 1 or 2 mics or a minimal mic setup, I would probably just move the microphone to get rid of that tinniness. So moving microphones is like the analog, or not the analog, it's like kind of the old school way to EQ, is just move the mic. That should be your first go-to, and then if you need a little more finessing, then go to EQ. So moving on to my right side U87 close mic, and I can already tell that this mic is picking up way more low-end information, because it's on the low-end side of the piano. It's on the as you saw, when you're looking at the piano, it's on the right by the low strings. So I'm actually gonna cut some of those lows, because when I go with pair microphones, I like to go for symmetry. because I'm going for a nice big open stereo piano sound, and when I'm all done, I want it to sound balanced. I don't want the low end to sound more on one side than the other, and that's just a personal choice for me. I want it to sound really rich and balanced. So some engineers like to, put the low end information on one side and the high end on the other, or pan the piano just to one speaker. And pretty much all the jazz records I've mixed are acoustic records with piano. I like to pan piano in the mix stereo and have it sound kind of stretching across the mix. A lot of old school jazz recordings, the piano is panned to one side, and I find that kind of diminishes the size of how big the instrument sounds, and because you're limiting the scope of where you're putting it in the stereo field. So piano is such a broad instrument, as are drums. I like to kind of have them cover the whole sound, and I would make an exception to that approach if there was a lot of stuff in a mix that didn't really fit all together. If there was, say, like piano and full orchestra and keys and guitars, then I'd probably have to get into more left and right panning to make sure everything has a place. But since this is solo piano today, I'm just going for like the most giant sound I can get. So. So that was my stereo pair individually, U87 left, U87 right, both listening in mono. Now I'm happy with those individual mic sounds, so I'm gonna pan them left and right and listen as a stereo pair, get my gain levels so that they're even, make sure the distribution of frequencies is pretty even, and then I'll move on to the next pair. So I'm happy with those U87s, and an additional thing that's amazing about GSI Studios here is that we have a Studer 24-track tape machine. We have the A827, and so I'm checking my levels here. For gain staging in this studio, you basically have to keep an eye on a few places in the chain. The first place would be the preamp. You check out the VU meter here to make sure you're not clipping, and the board tells you if you're clipping on the channels. And then I need to check the gain of the Studer because the board is sending to the Studer tape machine. So I'm keeping an eye on the levels over there. And then the board is the tape machine is returning and printing to Pro Tools, so I have to check my level there too. That's where the final level is. So that's a easy visual level to check. But I have to listen for analog distortion to make sure I'm not crunching the level, hitting it too hard. Now I'm going to move on to the Royer close mics, left and right. I'm going to kind of go through quickly and do the same thing I just did with the U87s, put them in mono, listen individually, then put them together. So a really cool thing about how we set up today is that I initially set up the U87s and the Royers side by side just as a way to compare the two, kind of for your sake to hear the difference between the two pairs of microphones. And then it dawned on me that they would be in phase with each other and that they would actually really complement each other using at the same time. And they sound amazing together. That's actually the first time I've mic'd it like that. Like I said, I've only ever done one or the other. So since I know I'm using them together, the 87s are brighter. The Royers are darker, as you just heard. And if I was using the Royers by themselves, I would probably boost the high end and make them brighter. But I don't need to do that now because the 87s capture that brightness. The Royers capture kind of like a more rolled off, rounder, warmer sound. and kind of a more even sound too across the sonic spectrum. So the Royers are, the levels are good. I'm happy with the EQ. I cut a tiny bit of low end on the Royers and left the high end alone. And I'm gonna drop them in with the 87s and check them out together. So here comes that. So I was just kind of listening to the Royers and 87s together, and they are in phase with each other. They're not perfectly in phase. When I flip the phase, they sound noticeably worse, so that means that they are more in phase than out of phase. But when they're set evenly, so they're both at playing back at 0 dB, I hear that they sound a little, I can hear that they're not perfectly in phase. So a couple ways I can kind of complement that or adapt to that. First one is just flipping the phase on the preamps, which I did, and that doesn't work because that makes them sound worse. Second thing I can do is pan them a little less wide, because this console has a super wide panning. It sounds wider than software does. So sometimes it almost sounds too wide, which is a great option to have, not a problem to have really. So what I'll do is I'll bring in the panning of the console a little bit, and that kind of makes the frequencies of the two mics blend together more instead of being completely separate, one side, the other side. When they're blended together, they tend to work together. So I just panned in both the Royers a little bit from center and the 87s, probably about, if 100 is a hard pan and 0 is mono, probably to about 75. And that sounds a little bit better, but now I'm going to drop the Royers in level just a little below the 87s, and it's going to still a little bit better. And the other thing I'm going to do to really make the phase kind of sync up is, if you remember, I spoke about the TLM 49, which I use kind of as a mono middle mic. This is exactly why I use that mic in the middle, because that mic captures the low end of the piano, and I want the bass to sound centered. It starts sounding a little wonky if the bass is a little left heavy. That's one of those like subliminal things you hear in music. It's just off-putting somehow. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't sound grounded. And I'm hearing that with the 87s and the Royers, is that both the right side mics are picking up more low end because they're in front of the low strings of the piano. So to kind of offset that, I put that mono TLM mic dead in the middle. And that mic is fatter than all those other mics. So that's really going to make the low end sound rooted. And then that's kind of like, that's the piano sound, the beginning of the piano sound I'm going for. So let's check out that TLM mic. So check that out. You're going to listen to the U87s as a stereo pair by themselves, and then I'm going to drop in that TLM 49 mic, and you're going to hear the sound just like, then it's got the bass, it's got the meat. It sounds more realistic, like you're standing in the room. So I'm going to toggle back and forth between TLM out at first, and then I'll put it in, and you'll hear the difference. And the great thing about recording with a lot of mics is that so long as I record everything cleanly and in phase, everything is going to sound really good. So I don't even have to decide now what my final configuration is, which mics I'm going to use. As long as like right now, that sounds amazing. I love how it sounds, and that's just the close mics. That's the 5 mics on the piano, the 87s, the Royers, and the TLM all together. that's a great piano sound. I could go ahead with that, but it doesn't give me much option as far as depth. It sounds very close. So that's why I have the room mics, is to give myself more options. But just with those five mics alone, I have a lot of options. I can use the 87s and the TLM. I can use the Royers and the TLM. I can use the 87s and the Royers. You know, I have probably 3 to 5 options just with those alone. So now let's start moving to the room mics. Let's check out the Telefunken 260s, which are the open pair catching the whole room. So let's check those out. And I'm not going to be listening to the close mics while I do this. This is only those room mics, and then I'll put it all together later on. So room mics, by nature of just being further away from the sound source, are going to sound a little cloudier, a little darker. They're not going to be as detailed. So what I do to work with that is I boost the top end usually to make it brighter and sound more like the room. And a lot of times the low end of a room mic is especially cloudy and unclear. So I'll cut that. And also a lot of times room mics can pick up unwanted room or building noise. In New York City, you might deal with the subway, or you might deal with an array of things, air conditioning, or any type of room hum that is hard to get rid of, or you're unable to get rid of. So I did cuts on the low end. I did cuts on the extreme low end, like below 63 I cut, and then I did boosts in the low mids, 125, and a couple boosts on the top end, 16K, 8K, 4K, and then I just pan them side to side. Room mics tend to sound, a pair of room mics tend to sound pretty similar to one another because they're further away from the source. So like I said, they're capturing even information. So I pretty much mirrored the EQs to be the same. And now I'm going to check out my Coles mics, which are the ribbon mics in the room, to give me an alternative choice, a darker sound. And then we'll see how they all work together. And I should also make note that Taylor is casually an incredible piano player that I'm kind of going about my business, doing my little tweaks. And the stuff he's playing is pretty incredible. The quality of the musician makes an enormous difference on the sound you get on this side as an engineer. Because when you get someone who can play an instrument like that and is so conscious of the sound he's producing, and so purposeful with the type of sound he's producing from the instrument, when you get a musician that good, like your first job is just don't screw it up. Just capture it. Just capture what he's producing. If you can enhance it, that's awesome. Really good musicians are often really particular about the sound you get them, and they really speak the language of that engineers speak. Maybe not on the technical side, but they can certainly point something out to you that doesn't quite sit right. They might not know it's the high mids that aren't quite right, but they'll tell you it's too bright, or they'll tell you something. So you got to listen to the people you're working for. If they have feedback, you should incorporate it. And I've worked with Taylor enough. The first few times we worked together, he would do a sound check, come in and listen, and then I'd tweak, and then he'd give me feedback, and it was kind of a volley back and forth until he was like, "Yeah, awesome! Like that's the sound I'm going for." And at this point, we've worked together enough where I kind of know what it is. But you have to be open-minded to what people want and what people sound like and how to represent that accurately. So right now, all of the close mics are in phase. The Coles mic in the middle of the room, kind of between the stereo pairs, is totally in phase. So I haven't flipped any phase. So that means I've been successful in positioning the microphones to be in phase with one another, which is what you want to strive for out of the gate. And now I'm going to drop in the Telefunken room pair, and I'm guessing they're going to be out of phase enough with the close mics that I'll have to flip it on the console. So now I'm going to drop those in, and you're going to see me toggle the phase of the Telefunkens in and out, toggle the phase in and out, and kind of decide which is going to sound better. So the interesting thing about flipping phase is sometimes if it's a close call, you're going to have to choose between one sonic characteristic over another. Today, it's working out. When I flip the phase, when these phase buttons light up on the console, which means the phase of the tellies is reversed, the polarity, I'm getting more low end when I do that, and also the stereo image, the width of the stereo image is kind of is opening up a lot. It sounds more mono when I'm leaving the phase as set up in the room. So that's an easy call for me today. Is that I'm going to flip the phase on those tellies, and this is just between the Telefunkens in the room and the 87s close. So I have to. That phase is in order now. I have to check the phase against the other ribbon pair and with the Coles room mic. So it's a little bit of a juggling act. Also, another key trick to assessing what your phase is doing is to listen in mono. A lot of consoles and monitoring systems have a mono button. So if you listen to stereo images or stereo mixes in mono, it's going to make everything collapse to mono, and then your phase cancellation is going to be more evident. So if something's out of phase, you're really going to hear it when it goes to mono. It might even disappear. Your low end might just drop off entirely. Or if you're dealing with drums, you might lose your snare drum, or you might your mix is going to change. So that's what I was just doing a second ago, is checking mono. So interesting thing now is that when I listen to all of the mics together, what I was just saying about phase, it gets a little more complicated because you're balancing more signals and more audio information, and you're balancing more fields of what you're capturing in the room. So when I put everything together and start flipping the phase of the Telefunkens, I'm actually changing my mind. I'm feeling that the phase of the Telefunkens as is in the room is actually working better with everything all together. So I'm flipping back and forth, making sure that's the move. The thing about phase is you can reverse it after it's recorded. Easily done with most EQ plugins. So not a deal breaker, but obviously you want things to be as in phase as possible on the front end so that it sounds the best it's going to sound. So the only remaining mic that we haven't addressed is the Sony C800, which was the room mic. Honestly, at this point, when I'm listening to everything, we have a lot of options. So I'm guessing I definitely wouldn't use all these mics together at the same time, because that would actually diminish the piano sound by having a lot of phase issues. But let's check it out. This is going to be more of an open room sound. This is a cool mic to do something extreme with, crazy compression to get more of a room sound, or extreme EQing if you want some different flavor in there. So let's check it out. So with that mic, since it's kind of an auxiliary mic, I sucked out all the low end and really boosted the high end more than I normally would, just to give me another option for room brightness. Now the last thing I'll do, I'm pretty happy with what we've got. Again, my aesthetic is to just capture as much information as possible, and then I can always limit that information later. I can mute microphones, I can cut stuff out with EQ, but I have more than enough capture of the piano to do a lot of different things with it. So now I'm rolling in Pro Tools, and I'm gonna visually check out my levels, make sure my left side and right side of each pair is even. I want those to come in evenly. And just generally make sure I have enough gain coming in. It's not too hot, it's not too soft. And I also want to make sure he's going to play softly and then loudly, so I know the dynamic range of what we're dealing with. Hey Taylor, can you play as loud as you're going to play? So my levels are good. I brought down the U87s just a pinch because they were running a little bit hot. Now I'm going to start bringing in a little bit of reverb. We have the Bricasti outboard reverb. So I have all my mics set up to send to the reverb, and then we're going to hear that. Most piano players, definitely Taylor included, like to hear reverb in the headphones, and it just makes everything kind of blend together a little more, sound a little more natural. Especially because our room isn't gigantic, so you want to kind of create a little more space. So I like to use reverb in this situation, less of sounding like it's in a concert hall, and more just to kind of open up some more overtones. So you'll notice when I mute it, the piano sound gets a little smaller sounding and a little less like blended sounding. It sounds a little more like just kind of in a box. And then when I put in the reverb, it just kind of opens up a little bit and just sits a little bit better. Everything kind of meshes a little bit better. And I'm not recording this reverb. We're just hearing it. We could record it and then I could use it or not use it, but I'm not printing the reverb to tape. So I'm gonna have it muted and then I'm gonna bring it in. It's pretty subtle, but you'll hear a difference. It just makes it sound more like a piano. It makes it sound more like it really sounds in real life because you're adding kind of space. That's the thing you're trying to capture is, this room is, I don't know, 20 by 15. So the reverb helps kind of capture that dimension, that 3-dimension, that depth that you're looking for. So that's why I use it. So I want you to meet my right-hand man at GSI Studios, Jason Roskowski. He is an assistant engineer here and a staff engineer, and he helps me on most of my sessions and catches my mistakes, helps me set up, runs the tape machine during tape sessions. Right now we're rolling tape, so what you're hearing is coming from the mics to the console, from the console to 24 tracks of tape, although we're only using the 10 tracks right now because we have 10 mics. And then from the tape machine, it's hardwired out to Pro Tools. So we basically have one tape that we use over until it wears out or until we start to hear a difference in the quality. But so we're not splicing and cutting tape and editing tape. We're tracking the tape and it's dumping in real time to Pro Tools. So I edit sessions and audio just the same in Pro Tools as you would if you're working without tape. but the sound that's coming in is coming from the tape machine. You're getting a bit of saturation from the tape, a bit of really light compression, and tape just has a way of taking overtones and things that sound maybe a little separate and just kind of blending them together. So I love it for acoustic instrument sessions and any sessions with musicians. And I think that's pretty much a wrap for how I get piano sounds. And I'll close by saying this is how I get the sound that I like to get as an engineer, the sound that I imagine on records and the sound that I like to hear. And engineering is a very individualistic art, more than a science. So this is one way to do it. This is my way to do it. But there's an infinite ways to do it. So thanks to Sound on Sound. Thanks to Jason, GSI Studios, Josh Giunta. Love science music.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and share it, and subscribe to the Sound on Sound YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.